In the modern history of American political scandals, few chunks of time compare to what happened over the course of one 25-day period in the year 1992. There have been political scandals that have been more consequential, but just in terms of salaciousness and shock factor, and it all happening in a very compressed time period, that was a very important time period, there's really nothing that compares with this. This was the cover of a tabloid called Star magazine, published January 23rd, 1992. It was a story about the then frontrunner for the Democratic nomination for president, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton. And this tabloid newspaper alleged that Bill Clinton had had an extramarital affair. This was published January 23rd. 3 days later, on January 26th, Bill Clinton, with his wife at his side, gave an interview to 60 Minutes, fighting back against those tabloid allegations, calling them flat out false. The very next day, after that 60 Minutes interview, in front of basically every media outlet in the world, a woman named Jennifer Flowers gave a spectacle of a press conference, flanked by that tabloid magazine cover featuring her, in which she fought back against the Clintons and what they'd said on 60 Minutes. And she gave what she said were details of this alleged affair. And this was all happening in January 1992. That's the election year, right? Bill Clinton that year was trying to win the Democratic nomination for president in 1992. And it was January of that year, which means this was all happening at basically the key moment, the key test of whether this Arkansas governor really was going to make a run for the presidency. This was all happening right on the precipice of the New Hampshire primary. And just as the Jennifer Flowers allegations started snowballing in the media, then another story dropped about Bill Clinton's past, which blindsided everybody, and it could have proven to be just as hurtful to his chances. Just about a week after the Jennifer Flowers story, this emerged. It was a letter written by a young Bill Clinton when he was a Rhodes Scholar going to school in England. It's a letter in which he argued that he would not return to the United States to be drafted to fight in the Vietnam War. That letter was dated December 1969. Quote, "No government really rooted in limited parliamentary democracy should have the power to make its citizens fight and kill and die in a war they may oppose, a war which even possibly may be wrong. Sincerely, Bill Clinton." He wrote that in 1969 to the colonel in charge of the ROTC program at the University of Arkansas. "I, here in England, won't come home to get drafted to fight that terrible war." So, all at once, you've got the infidelity scandal, which includes not just the tabloid, but the rebuttal, and then the rebuttal to the rebuttal with the salacious press conference. Then, immediately thereafter, you've got the apparent draft dodger scandal. Now, you've got these two scandals breaking one on top of the other, dominating the news, dominating the political coverage, going right into the all-important New Hampshire primaries in 1992. And because of that, nobody really expected the Bill Clinton candidacy to survive those 25 days leading up to New Hampshire. But he survived it. He did it.
Let me say that while the evening is young, and we don't know yet what the final tally will be, I think we know enough to say with some certainty that New Hampshire tonight has made Bill Clinton the comeback kid.
Bill Clinton came in second that night in New Hampshire. He didn't win New Hampshire, but he didn't lose either in a strong field. And him showing so strongly in New Hampshire, after he took the best that anybody could have possibly conjured up to throw at him in terms of truly juicy, salacious scandals, not one but two of them right on top of each other, right ahead of that primary, him showing so strongly in the face of that, it is safe to say it saved his campaign. The New Hampshire primary in 1992 saved the Bill Clinton for president campaign. And of course, Bill Clinton went on to win the Democratic nomination and then to be president for 2 full terms. But his presidential viability really did start with New Hampshire making him the comeback kid. More recently, New Hampshire made a comeback kid out of another candidate for president who everybody thought was beat until New Hampshire showed that he wasn't.
I'm past the age when I can claim the noun kid, no matter what adjective precedes it. But tonight, we sure showed them what a comeback looks like. you. Thank you. When the pundits declared us finished, I told them, I'm going to New Hampshire where the voters don't let you make their decision for them.
John McCain had a tough primary campaign in 2008. There were whole stretches of months at a time when the biggest news out of the McCain campaign was, how many of his staff members were quitting, how poorly his campaign was going, how demoralized everybody was, how he had no money, no support. John McCain had to win New Hampshire in 2008. Specifically, he had to beat Mitt Romney there. And predictions of his demise to the contrary, he did it. He won New Hampshire, and that victory in New Hampshire went a really long way to helping John McCain look strong and resilient, helping him win the Republican nomination that year. That same year, on the Democratic side of the New Hampshire primary, in 2008, it was even more dramatic than it was on the John McCain-Mitt Romney side. On the Democratic side in 2008, the drama there was in part about how wrong all the polls were on the Democratic side. Barack Obama had just beaten Hillary Clinton in Iowa the week before. That Iowa victory was huge for him. All signs were pointing to him doing the same thing again in New Hampshire. But it turns out all those signs were wrong. Everybody was wrong. The polls were super wrong in 2008 about the Democratic primary in New Hampshire. Hillary Clinton, in fact, beat Barack Obama in New Hampshire that night. And that was our first concrete early sign that the fight that year for the Democratic nomination was going to be an epic, epic fight. Which it was, right? It went all the way almost to the Democratic convention in terms of figuring it out between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. It was just an amazing primary battle. But the polling before New Hampshire that year had basically called it a done deal for Barack Obama. And that specifically led to one very funny, very sobering moment, which I can play on a loop in my head when it's called for. I think I have still yet to live it down. Basically, it was this moment live on the air when all of us here in this studio got schooled by Tom Brokaw on the night of the New Hampshire primary, right? Tom Brokaw, eminence grise of NBC News, taking part in our MSNBC coverage of the New Hampshire primary that year. And we're all on the air marveling about how wrong the polls were in New Hampshire and what a surprise it is that Hillary Clinton won in New Hampshire when the polls said Barack Obama would win. We'd all marched into that coverage expecting something on the basis of the polling. And that led to this awesome moment from Tom Brokaw on MSNBC that night on the subject of us taking polling as a substitute for the voters' judgment. This was great.
You know what I think we're going to have to go back and do?
Yes, sir.
Wait for the voters to make their judgment.
Well, what do we do then? In the days before the balloting, we must stay home then, I guess.
No, we don't stay home. There are reasons to analyze what they're saying. We know from how the people voted today what moved them to vote. We can take a look at that, but we don't have to get in the business of making judgments before the polls have closed and trying to stampede and affect the process. Look, I'm not picking just on us. It's part of the culture in which we live these days. But I think that the people out there are going to begin to make some judgments about us, if they haven't already, if we don't begin to temper that temptation to constantly try to get ahead of what the voters are deciding in many cases, as we learned in New Hampshire, when they went into the polling booth today.
Tom Brokaw on the night of the New Hampshire primary in 2008, saying, we the media should not get ahead of the voters, right? We should avoid the temptation to try to get ahead of what the voters are deciding. Right? Don't let the polls dictate the results before the results are in. It's the voters that matter. Boy, did we learn that lesson in 2008. I mean, in New Hampshire alone, we learned that lesson, right? And partly you learn that lesson because, sometimes the polls are wrong. So if you, go into your punditry based on what the polls are saying, sometimes you get shown up. Sometimes that's the reason. But ultimately, you learn that lesson because this is an election, right? It's not a reality show. And it really is up to the voters to decide. And there's no substitute for the voters deciding. That is it. That is the apex. That's the only thing like that. That media failure in 2008 and in conservative media misreading the polls in 2012 and a few other times it has happened, right? Those embarrassments were just about, taking the polling and making bad predictions on the air, misreading momentum, right, based on the polling. Just about, the problem there was just the way people talked about the election. This year, That ongoing problem is much more serious and much more consequential. Because this year, it's not just about how people are talking about the election. This year, the Fox News channel has proposed taking the polling and using it to actually decide who gets to compete for president in the first place in the Republican Party. Who gets to be on the stage? Who gets to make their case to the voters? The Fox News channel is hosting the very first Republican primary debate this year. They have said they will only allow 10 candidates on the stage for that first debate. And the way Fox says they are going to decide which 10 candidates is by using the most recent national polling leading up to that debate. Fox is essentially saying that they want to use polling not just to, inform their anchors and their correspondents and their pundits in terms of how they talk about the race on TV. No, they want to use the polling to decide who gets to compete for the nomination in the first place. I mean, the way most Americans are going to decide who to vote for in the primary process, the way most voters experience the candidates and decide between them is by watching the debates, right? There are not that many of these debates, especially this year. Fox News is the gatekeeper for the very first one. And they have said they're going to keep quite a lot of the candidates out of that debate, out of the process, based on national polling. CNN is proposing doing the same thing. I mean, CNN's going to be hosting the second Republican debate, but CNN at least is being a little more open about what criteria they're going to use to pick their top 10 and exclude other candidates. Fox is being really vague. We don't know, for example, which polls they're going to consider when they make that top 10 candidate cutoff. We don't know if they're going to be rounding their polling averages. And that might sound like an esoteric math geek problem, but it's life or death for a candidate like Carly Fiorina. The folks at 538 analyzed this week. Right now, Carly Fiorina averaging out to 1.6% in the polls. If Fox rounds her 1.6% up to 2%, then she ties with John Kasich, and then she makes it into the debates. If Fox is not going to round up, if they're not going to say 1.6 is roughly 2%, it's 1.6%, then she'll be out. 0.4%, and the decision about rounding in the national polls would be the determining factor here to decide whether or not the only woman potential nominee on the Republican side will be allowed to realistically compete for the nomination. That's ridiculous. I mean, you're talking about infinitesimal differences here that really will determine whether or not a candidate's campaign is essentially over. And the gatekeeper is a cable news network? The way that Fox News is proposing winnowing down the field this year, what they have disclosed anyway, is at best an arbitrary basis on which to be deciding something as important as who is allowed to compete for the presidency. It is a terrible decision that they have decided to make, making this decision themselves instead of leaving it to the voters. And it's bad enough when, cable news networks or anybody talking about this stuff on TV supplants their own judgment for the voters. But for the network to decide organizationally that they're deciding who's running, and they're not even disclosing how exactly they're making that decision. And this is all happening as more and more viable candidates have been getting in on the Republican side. Look at the folks on this list. These are not kooks and cranks, right? These are not people who have no chance at winning the nomination. These are not people who are faking a run or running a protest candidacy or not planning on hiring staff and they just want a book deal, right? I mean, Republicans are right, honestly, when they say they have a very deep bench. And this is a group of candidates they can be proud of. They are right. This is not a clown car. But as more and more of those potentially viable candidates have gotten in, with still more to come, it has become more and more clear that Fox actually can't do what they have said they're going to do. It really just can't stand. It cannot stand. And now, as of today and as of tonight, it's on. Because as of today, it's not just me whinging about that on liberal TV, right? As of now, basically the entire Republican leadership of the all-important state of New Hampshire is saying it too. This is a letter from dozens and dozens of Republican leaders in New Hampshire sent to Fox News today saying basically we, the voters of New Hampshire, get to decide who deserves this nomination. We've done it in years past. We're good at it. We deserve to do it again this year. It's going to be us making this decision, not you, some cable news network. Quote, historically, it has been the responsibility of early primary and caucus states to closely examine and winnow the field of candidates. And it is not in the electorate's interest to have TV debate criteria supplant this solemn duty. The proposed limitations are unnecessarily narrow and risk eliminating potentially viable candidates based on unreliable national polling that is rarely predictive of primary election outcomes. Letter goes on to say that denying candidates the opportunity to participate in the first debate would, quote, artificially distort the political process. They make a strong, cogent, reasoned case that what Fox News has proposed would be bad for the Republican Party and it would be bad for the country. And then there's also just the sheer number of signers of this letter that make the most powerful part of their argument for them, right? More than 50 Republican elected officials and leaders and activists from the state of New Hampshire have signed on to this thing. This is not some crank outfit, right? This is essentially the powers that be in New Hampshire Republican politics saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're an early state for a reason. We make a decision about which candidates get on the stage and which candidates don't. Our voters make those decisions. Those decisions don't get made by some TV network. They also went on to propose some alternate ideas that they think would be more fair in terms of how to organize the early debates. They proposed an idea in which Fox would broadcast multiple debates, back-to-back debates, mix the top tier and lower tier candidates essentially randomly together. So you don't have 20 people on stage all at once, but maybe you have 2 back-to-back debates of 10. And you mix them according to top tier candidates and lower tier candidates, and you see how it goes. And who knows, maybe that would be a better way of doing it. I don't know. But what is becoming very clear is that Fox News' plan to just cut off the field at a nice round number based on flexible, irrelevant, and opaque criteria, it is really not going to stand. That's not going to be the way it happens. It's not going to stand with Republicans. It's not going to stand in New Hampshire. And it's really just not going to stand for the country. And further, we have a bit of breaking news on that last point. The New Hampshire Union Leader, the newspaper in New Hampshire, right? The Union Leader, the most influential newspaper in New Hampshire, has just announced that on the same night as this troubling first debate that's been scheduled by Fox News, on that same night, the New Hampshire Union Leader is calling the question. They are going to host what they're calling a candidates forum. They're inviting the candidates to participate. They say it will be televised live by C-SPAN. This is the Fox killer. The paper's publisher tonight calling Fox News' debate plan a, quote, real threat to the first-in-the-nation primary. Quote, voters here have an independent streak. They might well be disposed to vote for a so-called also-ran who didn't meet the Fox criteria, but who has spent the time and effort here to meet them and answer their questions. The New Hampshire Union Leader and New Hampshire Republicans just blew up the Republican primary process for 2016. We have reached out to the Fox News Channel and to the Republican National Committee for their comment and their reaction tonight. We have not yet heard anything back, but we're sitting by the phone waiting. Honestly, though, this is a huge, huge, huge set of developments for the run for the presidency this year. The Fox News plan for the debates is not going to stand. It's not going to stand in New Hampshire, and that means it cannot stand. And what just happened tonight is that New Hampshire, the Republican Party, and the Union Leader newspaper in New Hampshire have just blown up the Republican Party's plans for how to run its primary process for 2016. Blown up as of tonight. Woohoo.